Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something as sweet as it is fascinating. How honey was used by the ancient Egyptians to preserve mummies. Imagine being in a dark, quiet room, filled with the subtle, warm scent of beeswax and honey. This isn't just your average sticky treat. It's a tool for immortality. Now, while you may think honey is best for sweetening tea, the Egyptians had a far more profound use for it, preserving their dead for the afterlife. But let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive one of their mummification sessions. Not unless you've mastered ancient embalming techniques and can stomach a little bit of, well, let's just say, unpleasantness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop me a comment with your location and local time. Let's see where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start with the origins of honey, which, spoiler alert, go way back. Ancient Egyptians didn't just stumble upon honey like some accidental discovery in a jar. Honey had been around for thousands of years before it became synonymous with a sweet treat to drizzle on your toast. The Egyptians were well aware of honey's value long before the first jar of honey made its way into modern kitchens. Bees were considered sacred creatures, revered by the Egyptians for their industrious nature and their ability to create such a valuable substance. Honey wasn't just food, it was something divine, something that could preserve life, even in death. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly understood the full extent of honey's preservative powers, or if they just stumbled upon it by trial and error. But one thing is clear: honey had a unique place in Egyptian culture. It was seen not only as a source of sweetness for the living, but as a crucial part of rituals that prepared the deceased for their journey into the afterlife. For the Egyptians, the afterlife was as important as life itself, and preserving a body to ensure it could make the journey was of the utmost importance. But how exactly did honey come to be such a critical part of mummification? Well, the process itself was far more intricate than you might think. Mummification involved removing organs, drying the body out, and packing it with all sorts of materials to preserve it for eternity. It was a lengthy and often delicate procedure. Honey was one of the key ingredients in this process, both as a preservative and as a symbol of the afterlife. The sticky substance would be used to coat the body, sealing it from the ravages of time and the elements. As we explore further, you'll discover why honey was specifically chosen and why it became such an integral part of this ancient tradition. But for now, just know that the Egyptians were ahead of their time in recognizing honey's remarkable powers, using it for much more than just sweetening their food. You're still with me, right? Let's keep it rolling. By now, you're probably wondering, how exactly did the Egyptians use honey to preserve their dearly departed? Well, the mummification process itself was a bit of an art form, one that required both skill and patience, and yes, a good amount of honey. Let's take a closer look at this ancient ritual. The ancient Egyptians believed that in order to achieve immortality, the body had to be perfectly preserved. They didn't just want the person to remain physically intact. They wanted their soul to have a safe passage into the afterlife, where it would live forever. To achieve this, a series of steps had to be followed to prepare the body for eternity. And believe me, these were no ordinary embalming methods. They were elaborate, sometimes messy, and pretty intense by today's standards. The first step in the mummification process was removing all the internal organs. Now imagine you're an Egyptian embalmer. Perhaps you've got a really steady hand and a lot of patience. You're carefully slicing open the body and extracting the organs, which were considered essential for the soul's journey. The heart, for example, was believed to be the seat of the soul, so it was carefully preserved in a special container called a canopic jar. Meanwhile, the stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines were similarly removed and preserved. Now here's where it gets a bit more interesting. Honey wasn't just slathered on the outside of the body, like some sticky glaze on a donut. No. Honey played a key role in the internal preservation process. After the organs were removed, the body was dried out using a special salt mixture known as natron. This mixture helped to absorb moisture and ensure that the body wouldn't decompose. Once that process was complete, honey was poured into the body cavity and all around the inner organs. It worked as a sealing agent, preventing bacteria and other microbes from causing decay. It also helped to mask any odors that might have arisen during the embalming process. I mean, let's face it, bodies don't exactly smell like roses after being disemboweled. Historians still argue whether honey's role in mummification was truly intentional, or if the ancient Egyptians simply observed that honey didn't rot and decided to use it. After all, they were also using resins and oils, so honey could have been just another natural product they tried out. But the more we learn about ancient Egypt, the clearer it becomes that the Egyptians had a deep understanding of preservation, even if they didn't fully grasp the science behind it. Once the honey had been placed, the body would be tightly wrapped in layers of linen. This was no quick task. The wrapping was intricate and thorough, ensuring that the body was protected from the elements for millennia. In some cases, the body would be covered in a layer of resin, and then, of course, more honey would be applied, ensuring that everything stayed sealed tight. You might be thinking, okay, but how does honey actually preserve the body? Well, honey is naturally antiseptic. It's hygroscopic, which means it draws moisture out of its surroundings and helps to prevent bacterial growth. It also has a low pH, which makes it an inhospitable environment for most microorganisms. In short, honey created an environment where decay was unlikely, even without refrigeration or modern preservation methods. Not bad for something that's basically just nectar from flowers, right? Now imagine what it must have been like for the ancient Egyptians. The whole mummification process was a sacred ritual, and every step, from the careful removal of organs to the final wrapping of the body, was done with an intense sense of reverence. And honey, as sweet and simple as it seems today, played a key role in making sure their loved ones could safely travel into the afterlife. It was part of their understanding of life, death, and everything in between. Okay, we've got the mummification process laid out. Body wrapped, organs preserved, honey sealing everything in a nice, sweet cocoon. But now let's dive deeper into why honey was such a key ingredient in the Egyptians' efforts to defy death. You see, honey wasn't just a nice-to-have in the mummification process. It had properties that made it a near-perfect preservative. In fact, those very qualities are what made it an essential part of Egyptian ritual and practical life. We're used to thinking of honey as a sweet treat, something to drizzle on pancakes or stir into tea. But back in ancient Egypt, honey was much more than just food. It was a substance that could literally make something last forever. You might think, but how? Let's break it down. First off, honey is naturally antimicrobial. We've known for centuries that honey can kill bacteria and fungi. Ancient Egyptians likely didn't have microscopes, but they were sharp observers. They might not have understood the science behind why honey doesn't spoil, but they knew it didn't rot like most other organic materials. This quality made honey an ideal candidate for preserving the dead, and it's one reason why jars of honey found in tombs are still edible to this day, thousands of years after being sealed away. So, when they poured honey into the body cavities and over the organs, they were creating an environment that would keep decay at bay. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians knew exactly how honey worked, or if it was just one of those trial and error discoveries. They used other substances like resins, oils, and spices, and it's possible that honey was just one part of a broader preservation strategy. But when you think about it, honey's antimicrobial properties make it a pretty smart choice. What's even more fascinating is that honey isn't just a preservative. It has a low pH. It's acidic, which creates an inhospitable environment for microorganisms that thrive in more neutral or alkaline environments. In short, honey was nature's way of protecting the dead from decomposition. It worked as a natural barrier against bacteria, mold, and the environmental factors that would normally cause decay. It didn't matter if the body was buried for days, weeks, or centuries. Honey could ensure that the preservation process would outlast the ravages of time. Imagine it. The body would be embalmed, wrapped tightly in linen, and then sealed with layers of honey, resin, and oils. Each of these substances had a specific purpose. The resin, for instance, would harden over time, creating a sort of shell that would keep out moisture. The honey, on the other hand, would provide a softer, stickier layer of protection, acting as both a preservative and a symbolic gesture. After all, the Egyptians believed that preserving the body was key to ensuring that the soul could safely pass into the afterlife. It wasn't just about keeping the body intact. It was about making sure the spirit could live on. But honey wasn't the only thing that played a role in these sacred rituals. The embalming process was extremely complex, involving various techniques that spanned over several weeks. The organs were removed and carefully stored in canopic jars. The body was dried using natron, a naturally occurring salt, and the skin was treated with oils and resins. But honey had a special place in all this. It wasn't just for preserving flesh. It was for ensuring that the journey to the afterlife was as smooth and sweet as possible. It had a spiritual significance too. In ancient Egyptian religion, honey was often associated with the gods, and it was believed that honey could serve as an offering to the deities. Some rituals even involved honey as a divine gift to ensure favor from the gods in the afterlife. Now, I can hear you thinking, okay, honey is amazing, but what about the mummies themselves? Were the Egyptians really that precise with their methods? Oh yes, they were, but we'll get to that in the next part of our journey. Now that we've covered honey's magical preservation properties, let's step into the spiritual side of things, because this wasn't just about mummifying a body for the sake of keeping it intact. The ancient Egyptians saw mummification as a sacred process, one that not only preserved the body but also prepared it for the journey into the afterlife. And honey played a significant role in that spiritual journey, not just in the physical preservation of the body. Picture this. You're an Egyptian priest, standing in the dim light of a temple, surrounded by incense and the quiet murmur of chants. You hold in your hands a jar of honey, a substance not just used for its practical benefits, but also as an offering to the gods. To the Egyptians, honey wasn't just food, it was a divine substance. The bees, they believed, were sacred creatures, and the honey they produced was seen as a gift from the gods, especially the sun god Ra. This wasn't your average sweetener. This was a potent symbol of life, death, and immortality. Honey, in the context of mummification, wasn't just preserving flesh. It was ensuring that the soul had a smooth journey to the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians used honey as a spiritual offering first and foremost, or if it was purely a preservative that happened to have symbolic importance. Some believe the honey was meant to sweeten the deceased's passage to the afterlife, while others suggest that honey was simply a convenient material for embalming. Either way, honey was deeply entwined with Egyptian beliefs about life and death. It's said that when mummification was performed, the body was not only preserved for eternity, but was also cleansed and purified. It was a spiritual transformation, and honey was one of the essential agents in this process. But let's dig a little deeper. The Egyptians believed that the soul, or Ka, lived on after death. This was why the preservation of the body was so crucial. Without a body, the soul couldn't recognize its former self and would be lost. The honey, used to preserve and seal the body, ensured that the Ka would be able to recognize its vessel and continue its journey in the afterlife. Honey, with its sticky golden allure, was a substance that connected the physical world with the spiritual one. It helped create a bridge, one that allowed the deceased to continue their existence beyond death. What's more, honey wasn't just used for the dead. It played a role in the daily rituals of the living as well. The Egyptians would use honey in offerings to the gods, believing it to have divine properties. Honey was sometimes placed in tombs as part of burial rituals, ensuring that the deceased would have the sustenance they needed in the afterlife. And of course, honey was also used in various medical applications. The Egyptians understood that honey could heal wounds, soothe burns, and act as an antiseptic. They had a deep respect for the properties of honey, and it wasn't just an embalming tool. It was a key component of both their spiritual and physical world. Now, some historians still debate whether the embalming process with honey was as widespread as we think. Was it only reserved for the elite or royalty, or was it something that the common people experienced as well? Well, the truth is that mummification was an expensive and labor-intensive process, so it's likely that only the wealthy and powerful could afford the full treatment. However, evidence suggests that honey, along with other substances like resins, was used for all levels of mummification, even if the quantities might have differed. What we do know is that honey had a special place in the hearts and minds of the ancient Egyptians. It was a material that linked the living with the divine, a substance that helped ensure the deceased could live on forever. It wasn't just about preserving the body, it was about preserving the soul, and honey was the sweet glue that held it all together. By now, we've explored how honey's role in the mummification process was both practical and spiritual. But here's where things get even more fascinating. Honey's preservation abilities were so impressive that it was sometimes discovered in ancient tombs, still perfectly preserved. We're talking about honey that's over 3,000 years old, and somehow it hasn't gone bad. It's as if time itself couldn't touch it. So, how did this miraculous substance hold up, even in sealed tombs for millennia? Let's take a step back and look at some of the extraordinary finds that reveal just how important honey was to the ancient Egyptians. The discovery of honey in tombs is nothing short of astounding. Archaeologists have unearthed jars of honey inside the burial sites of pharaohs and commoners alike, some of which are still perfectly edible today. One of the most famous examples of this is a jar of honey found in the tomb of King Tutankhamun. It's over 3,000 years old, and guess what? It's still sealed tightly, with no sign of spoilage. Now I know what you're thinking. Does that mean I can spread some of that on my toast? Well, in theory you could, but I wouldn't recommend it. After all, the honey might have lost a bit of its original flavor over the centuries. Still, it's a testament to how incredibly effective honey was as a preservative. Historians still argue whether this preservation of honey in tombs was purely accidental, or if the Egyptians had discovered something even more advanced about honey's longevity than we give them credit for. The fact that honey could remain unchanged for thousands of years without refrigeration or modern preservatives is a bit of a mystery. Some experts speculate that the sealed tombs, with their controlled environment, helped maintain the honey's quality, while others believe that the honey's natural composition, rich in sugars and low in moisture, was enough to keep it fresh, even in ancient times. So what's the deal with honey's amazing staying power? The secret lies in its unique chemical structure. Honey has a high concentration of natural sugars and very little water content, making it inhospitable to bacteria and microorganisms that would typically cause decay. That's why honey is able to maintain its pristine state for centuries, even millennia, when sealed properly. Add to that its low pH and antimicrobial properties, and it's no wonder honey has earned its place in history as one of the most remarkable natural preservatives. But this isn't just a modern-day curiosity. The ancient Egyptians had already figured out that honey could last indefinitely under the right conditions. In fact, some believe that the Egyptians deliberately placed jars of honey in tombs as part of their burial rituals, knowing that it could be used by the deceased in the afterlife. Whether the honey was intended for sustenance or as a symbol of immortality is still a topic of debate among historians. But one thing is certain. It was a valued commodity that served both practical and spiritual purposes. The preservation of honey over time wasn't just limited to tombs either. Honey's use in various aspects of Egyptian life, from medicine to religious rituals, further underscores its significance in their culture. In fact, honey was often included in offerings to the gods, believed to provide divine sustenance for the soul on its journey through the afterlife. And while we may never know the full extent of how the Egyptians viewed honey's lasting properties, it's clear that they held it in high regard. This discovery of ancient honey jars also raises interesting questions about the broader role of preservation in ancient Egyptian society. While mummification is the most famous form of preservation, the Egyptians were also skilled at preserving food, especially for long-term storage. Honey, with its natural preservative qualities, was just one example of how the Egyptians used the resources available to them to ensure their survival, both in this life and in the next. It's almost poetic, isn't it? That something as humble as honey, sweet, sticky, and simple, could transcend time and preserve not only the body, but also the very essence of Egyptian culture. As we continue our journey through the mummification process, we'll see how honey wasn't just a tool for preservation, it was a gateway to eternity. Let's pause for a moment to reflect on just how extraordinary honey really was in ancient Egypt. we've covered its pivotal role in preserving bodies and ensuring smooth passage into the afterlife. But there's another fascinating layer to this story: why honey was preferred over other substances for preservation. You see, honey wasn't the only natural product available to the Egyptians for embalming. There were other materials they could have used, like resins, oils, and even spices. So why honey? What made it stand out from the rest? To answer that, let's look at the other substances the Egyptians used for preservation. Resin, for example, was a key component in the embalming process. Resin, a sticky substance derived from tree sap, was used to seal the body after it was wrapped in linen. It helped harden the bandages and created a durable outer layer that protected the body. Oils, such as cedar oil, were also used to treat the skin and organs, ensuring that the body remained well preserved. And let's not forget about natron, an essential ingredient in drying out the body during the mummification process. Natron is a naturally occurring salt that helped draw moisture from the body, preventing decomposition. But despite all these alternatives, honey still managed to rise above the rest. The answer lies in its unique chemical composition, which gave it distinct advantages over other substances. As we've already discussed, honey is naturally antimicrobial and has a low pH. This makes it an inhospitable environment for bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that could cause decay. But it wasn't just about the science. Honey's natural properties allowed it to be used in a variety of ways. Not only did it act as a preservative, but it also helped seal and protect the body, making it more effective than many other substances. Historians still argue whether honey's use in mummification was based on a conscious understanding of its chemical properties, or whether it was just a happy coincidence that the Egyptians chose it. Some believe the Egyptians stumbled upon honey's preservative qualities simply by observing its effects on food and other organic materials. Others suggest that they understood honey's potential as a preservative, having observed its use in food storage and medical practices. Either way, honey's effectiveness in preserving bodies cannot be denied. It was, in many ways, the perfect substance for ensuring that the deceased could travel into the afterlife without the fear of decay. But honey's use in mummification wasn't purely practical. There was also a symbolic component to its application. In ancient Egypt, honey was associated with the sun god Ra, who was often linked to creation, life, and immortality. The Egyptians believed that Ra's life-giving energy could be channeled through honey, ensuring that the deceased would be granted eternal life. This connection between honey and the gods made it more than just a material for embalming. It was a divine substance, capable of protecting the body and soul from the ravages of time. As you might imagine, honey's association with Ra also meant that it was often included in religious rituals and offerings. Honey was used in temple offerings to the gods, believing it could attract divine favor. And when it came to mummification, honey wasn't just about preserving the body. It was about ensuring that the soul would remain connected to the divine realm, making its way through the afterlife without a hitch. The Egyptians didn't just want their loved ones to stay intact. They wanted them to thrive in the next world. And honey was one of the tools they believed would make that possible. In addition to its spiritual significance, honey had practical uses in daily Egyptian life. It wasn't just confined to the tombs of the pharaohs. Honey was a staple in Egyptian homes, used in everything from cooking to medicine. It was believed to have healing properties and was often applied to wounds and burns to promote healing. Honey was also used in various ointments and balms, making it a key part of Egyptian medical practices. So, whether it was for the body or the soul, honey had a multifaceted role in ancient Egyptian culture. Now let's step back for a moment and think about the bigger picture. Honey wasn't just a tool for the rich and powerful. It was something the Egyptians shared with the common people as well. The belief in honey's preserving and spiritual powers permeated Egyptian society. Whether used for embalming, for offering to the gods, or for its medicinal properties, honey played a significant role in both everyday life and the afterlife. It was an indispensable part of Egyptian culture, a symbol of life, death, and eternity. All right, we've talked about honey's role in mummification, its preservation properties, and its divine connection to the gods. But what about the bigger picture? How did the Egyptians really see honey in their daily lives? Was it just another commodity? Or was it something even more fundamental to their worldview? Let's take a step into the everyday world of ancient Egypt and see how honey wasn't just a tool for preserving the dead, but a key ingredient in the living's day-to-day existence. First off, honey was essential to the Egyptians in ways we might not immediately think of. Sure, it was used in embalming, but it also played a significant role in their diet. In fact, honey was one of the few sweeteners available to the Egyptians. Sugar, as we know it today, wasn't really a thing. The sweet stuff came from dates, figs, and of course honey. Honey was used in a variety of dishes, from sweet pastries to more savory offerings. It was the go-to ingredient for adding a touch of sweetness to their meals, and it was prized not just for its taste but also for its nutritional benefits. But it wasn't just food that honey was used for. The ancient Egyptians also saw honey as an essential ingredient in their medicinal practices. It was used in all sorts of concoctions to treat wounds, infections, and even digestive issues. Honey was known for its natural antibacterial properties, making it perfect for dressing wounds and burns. In fact, honey was one of the first antibiotics, long before penicillin was even a twinkle in science's eye. And while we now have modern medicine, the Egyptians knew that honey could be a life-saving substance. It helped prevent infections, promote healing, and soothe irritated skin. So, not only was honey used for the afterlife, it was actively keeping the living healthy and strong. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the science behind honey's medicinal properties, or if they were just using it, based on trial and error. But one thing is clear: they had an incredible amount of trust in honey's power. From royal tombs to everyday homes, honey was used to maintain both physical health and spiritual well-being. And it didn't stop there. The Egyptians even used honey in their beauty routines. Yes, you heard that right. Honey was often used as an ingredient in face masks and beauty treatments, prized for its ability to moisturize and rejuvenate the skin. In a world without modern skincare products, honey was their go-to solution for everything from soothing dry skin to healing cuts. It was the Swiss Army knife of the ancient Egyptian home, preserving the body, healing wounds, and even ensuring that their skin stayed soft and glowing. There's something almost poetic about that, don't you think? In a time when the knowledge of the natural world was still emerging, the Egyptians had discovered something that could do it all. But what made honey so revered by the Egyptians? It wasn't just about its practical uses. Honey, as we've seen, had a deep spiritual connection. It was tied to the gods, especially Ra, the sun god. The Egyptians believed that honey was a sacred substance that carried divine power. In fact, it was often included in religious rituals and offerings. The belief was that honey could connect the physical world to the spiritual one. Offering honey to the gods was a way of ensuring that the deceased would have a smooth journey into the afterlife, that they would be sustained with sweetness and protection on their way to eternity. And let's not forget the bees themselves. Bees were sacred creatures in Egyptian mythology, often associated with the sun god Ra. They were seen as symbols of fertility, renewal, and the divine. It was said that Ra's tears transformed into bees, making honey a direct link to the sun, God's power. This divine association made honey even more valuable, not just as a food or medicine, but as a symbol of life and immortality. The Egyptians didn't just view honey as a practical substance. They saw it as a divine gift, something that could bridge the gap between the living and the gods. So, while honey played a huge role in the embalming process, its influence didn't end there. It was a symbol of divine protection, an essential part of daily life, and a powerful agent of preservation. Whether used in food, medicine, beauty, or spiritual rituals, honey was a substance that held a special place in the hearts of the ancient Egyptians. And this reverence for honey, this recognition of its unique power, is something that resonates even today. After all, honey's staying power is still one of nature's greatest wonders, and the ancient Egyptians were the first to truly understand that. As we move through the layers of honey's importance in ancient Egypt, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how honey's role in mummification and daily life connects to the larger scope of Egyptian culture. After all, we're not just talking about one product in isolation. We're diving into a civilization that thrived for thousands of years, with a deep understanding of ritual, death, and preservation. Honey wasn't merely an afterthought in these practices. It was part of a larger cultural framework that celebrated the power of the natural world and the mysteries of the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians saw their lives as a constant preparation for what lay beyond. They didn't just work and play in the here and now. They lived with one eye firmly planted on the afterlife. It wasn't just about getting by in the present. It was about ensuring that their souls would continue to exist, thriving for eternity. The concept of immortality was central to their worldview, and everything from their monumental architecture to their elaborate burial rituals reflected this belief. But here's the thing. Mummification wasn't the only form of preservation the Egyptians were interested in. The same level of care they put into embalming their dead also extended to their food, their homes, and their daily practices. The idea of preserving the body, the soul, and even the world around them was embedded deeply in Egyptian thought. This preservation mindset wasn't just reserved for the elite or for royalty. It was part of the culture at every level. Yes, mummification might have been a privilege of the wealthy, but the understanding of preservation was something that transcended class. Honey, in this context, served as a metaphor for the Egyptians' desire to keep things intact, to make sure that nothing of value would be lost. It wasn't just a substance that preserved the body. It was a substance that reflected their belief that life, death, and everything in between was interconnected. Their entire civilization was built on this idea of immortality, not just for the gods, but for themselves. Historians still argue whether this fixation on immortality was born out of an actual belief in life after death, or whether it was more of a philosophical endeavor to understand the transient nature of life. One could say that the Egyptians' obsession with mummification, embalming, and preserving their bodies was both a spiritual act and an intellectual one. They wanted to prove that they could transcend the limitations of the physical world, just as honey could transcend time and preserve the body for eternity. So let's bring this back to honey and its place in the grander picture of Egyptian culture. It wasn't just about preserving the body in the literal sense. Honey represented a deeper concept, preserving the soul's journey into the afterlife, maintaining a connection with the gods, and keeping sacred traditions alive for generations. The careful use of honey in mummification was a spiritual practice, rooted in the Egyptians' belief that they could maintain balance between life and death. It wasn't just about making sure the body didn't decay. It was about making sure the soul didn't either. The presence of honey in tombs, rituals, and offerings to the gods speaks to a larger belief in the necessity of balance and preservation. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't a distant dream. It was a continuation of life. Everything they did, including their elaborate mummification processes, was geared toward ensuring that they could carry on in the next world, just as they did in this one. Now, this idea of immortality wasn't just tied to honey alone. The Egyptians also believed in the magical power of objects, spells, and rituals. The Book of the Dead, for example, was filled with incantations meant to protect the deceased and guide them through the perilous journey into the afterlife. The tombs of the pharaohs were filled with treasures, food, and supplies meant to help them in the next world. Honey was just one of many substances used to ensure that the transition from life to death was as smooth as possible. But honey had a unique place in this narrative. While other offerings like food, jewelry, and amulets were meant to sustain the body and soul in the afterlife, honey's role was different. It was both practical and symbolic, helping to preserve the body while also maintaining a divine connection with the gods. It was sweet, it was sticky, and it was sacred. Honey's dual role as both a physical preservative and a spiritual offering made it one of the most revered substances in ancient Egypt. It's almost poetic, really. In a world where death was seen as a natural continuation of life, honey acted as the bridge between the living and the divine. It ensured that the journey into the afterlife wasn't just possible, it was sweetened and sealed with the promise of immortality. As we continue to unravel the role of honey in ancient Egypt, it's important to take a moment and appreciate just how advanced the Egyptians were when it came to their understanding of preservation. Honey, with its unique combination of sweetness and practicality, wasn't just a product. They were using it in ways that hinted at a much deeper knowledge of the natural world and its properties. But, as with most ancient practices, the full scope of their methods and beliefs is still up for debate. Let's talk about a key aspect of mummification, the intricate balance between art and science. The Egyptians didn't just throw a bunch of herbs and honey into a tomb and hope for the best. They had a finely tuned system, honed over generations, that was aimed at preserving not just the body, but also the essence of life itself. And while we might not have the exact answers as to why honey was the go-to substance, it's clear that it was chosen because it had some incredibly unique properties, both chemical and symbolic. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the scientific reasons behind honey's effectiveness. Did they know that honey's low moisture content and high sugar concentration helped keep decay at bay? Probably not in the scientific sense we understand today, but they certainly recognized its effectiveness, and in a culture that placed such a premium on life after death, the value of preserving the body was clear. The Egyptians likely realized that honey was not just sweet. It was a substance that could offer real, practical protection against the ravages of time. But here's a fun twist. There are some theories suggesting that honey's role in mummification may have been more symbolic than we initially thought. While its preservative qualities were crucial, it's possible that honey was also used because of its connection to certain deities, particularly the sun god Ra. As we've mentioned before, honey was a sacred substance, and bees were believed to carry the divine energy of the gods. This divine connection likely added an extra layer of significance to honey's use in mummification. The ancient Egyptians believed that everything had a divine purpose, and the substances they used in mummification were no exception. Even the oils and resins used to preserve the body were thought to have spiritual significance, often associated with specific gods or qualities. By using honey in mummification, they weren't just preserving the body, they were also calling upon the gods' protection for the journey into the afterlife. Honey, with its golden hue and sweetness, was a substance that connected the earthly realm to the divine, ensuring that the deceased would be safe in the afterlife. Historians also continue to debate whether honey's use in mummification was widespread or if it was reserved for the royal and elite classes. It's true that the mummification process itself was quite expensive and time-consuming, meaning that it was likely a luxury reserved for those who could afford it. But there's evidence that even common people were sometimes mummified, albeit in simpler forms. The use of honey, however, may have been more exclusive. Archaeological discoveries suggest that honey was used most often in high-status burials, and in many cases it was found in jars placed alongside the body in tombs, likely as an offering to ensure the deceased's comfort in the afterlife. Despite this, honey's role wasn't strictly limited to the wealthy. It was used across society, for food, medicine, and spiritual practices. It was a substance that touched all layers of Egyptian life. From the humblest homes to the grandest tombs, honey had a presence. This omnipresence only adds to its mystique. It wasn't just a rare commodity, it was a revered one, carrying with it a deep cultural and spiritual significance that transcended social classes. Let's pause and think about the symbolism of this for a second. In a society as advanced and deeply spiritual as ancient Egypt, honey wasn't just a useful tool, it was a bridge between the human world and the divine. Every drop of honey that went into a mummified body wasn't just protecting the physical form, it was protecting the soul. It was a literal and figurative means of preservation. In fact, honey represented the very essence of life and continuity, something that would carry the deceased through eternity, keeping them sweetly connected to the gods. While we may never fully understand the depths of the Egyptians' knowledge, what we can say for sure is that honey wasn't just used to preserve flesh. It was used to preserve the soul. The very idea of immortality was wrapped up in the use of honey, from the rituals surrounding it to its place in the afterlife. And as we look back at these ancient practices, it's clear that the Egyptians had a far more profound understanding of preservation, of the body, the soul, and the essence of life itself than we often give them credit for. As we move deeper into the ancient Egyptian fascination with preservation, let's take a step back and look at some of the broader contexts in which honey was used. We've covered its role in mummification, its significance in spiritual rituals, and its connection to the gods. But let's zoom out a bit and think about how honey fit into the greater scheme of Egyptian life. Honey wasn't just reserved for embalming the dead. It had multiple uses across society, from food to medicine to beauty. We've already talked about how honey was used in the Egyptians' diet. It was their go-to sweetener, used in everything, from pastries to beverages. But beyond that, honey was also a major component in Egyptian medicine. Ancient Egyptian medical texts have references to honey being used as a treatment for wounds, burns, and even digestive issues. It was believed that honey could heal and cleanse the body, helping to prevent infection and promote healing. In fact, honey's antiseptic properties are still well known today. It's one of the oldest known remedies for wounds, and its use in Egyptian medicine underscores the depth of their understanding of natural healing. Honey wasn't just a cure for physical ailments. It was also considered a source of vitality. It was seen as a gift from the gods that had the power to rejuvenate and restore energy. Egyptian workers, especially those involved in the construction of the grand monuments, were often given honey as part of their diet. They believed it could sustain their energy and improve their health, especially during long days of labor under the hot Egyptian sun. So, honey wasn't just a luxury item, it was a vital part of the working class's sustenance. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians used honey for medicinal purposes because they understood its properties on a chemical level, or if they simply relied on its proven effectiveness through trial and error. Either way, honey's importance in Egyptian culture is undeniable. It wasn't just a sweet treat, it was a tool for maintaining health, energy, and well-being. Whether in the form of a honey-based salve, a sweetener for tea, or a balm for the skin, honey was woven into the fabric of Egyptian life. But honey wasn't just practical, it was also spiritual. In addition to its use in the embalming process and its connection to the gods, honey played a role in religious offerings. Offerings to the gods were a daily practice for the Egyptians, and honey, being a sacred substance, was often included. It was thought to have divine qualities, capable of attracting the favor of the gods. The Egyptians believed that honey could communicate their devotion and ensure protection in the afterlife. By offering honey to the gods, they were essentially creating a divine connection, ensuring that the deceased would be well protected and sustained during their journey through the afterlife. But let's not get too caught up in the spiritual aspects. Honey had a very real, practical application in daily Egyptian life. In fact, it was used in their beauty routines. The Egyptians were known for their elaborate beauty rituals, and honey played a significant role in these. Honey was used in face masks, body scrubs, and even hair treatments. Its moisturizing properties made it an excellent ingredient for skin care, and its antibacterial qualities helped keep the skin healthy and free from infections. The Egyptians understood that beauty wasn't just about appearance, it was about maintaining balance and health. And honey, with its natural healing and moisturizing properties, was a perfect fit for their beauty rituals. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians had a full understanding of the science behind honey's antibacterial properties, or if they were simply following long-standing traditions. Regardless of how they came to understand honey's benefits, the fact remains that it was a prized commodity in ancient Egyptian society. It wasn't just a food item or a medicine, it was a symbol of divine favor and vitality, and it was used to maintain the health of both the body and the soul. So, honey's role in Egyptian life went far beyond the tomb. It was a substance that connected the physical and spiritual realms, offering both practical and symbolic benefits. From preserving the body to healing wounds, from enhancing beauty to ensuring divine protection in the afterlife, honey was a thread that ran through nearly every aspect of Egyptian life. It was a tool, a symbol, and a gift from the gods, a sweet, sticky reminder of the ancient Egyptians' reverence for life, death, and everything in between. As we continue to explore the multifaceted role of honey in ancient Egyptian society, it's time to widen our lens and examine how honey was not only used in the rituals of the elite, but also in the broader Egyptian culture. We've seen how It helped preserve the dead, served as a sacred offering to the gods, and acted as both food and medicine. But how did honey fit into the everyday life of the average Egyptian, beyond the tombs and temples? To understand this, we need to take a closer look at the practicality of honey in the daily rhythms of Egyptian society. Let's start with something that might surprise you: honey's role in Egyptian agricultural practices. The Egyptians, as you probably know, were highly dependent on agriculture, particularly the cultivation of grains and crops along the fertile banks of the Nile River. But honey, surprisingly, played a key role in their agricultural system too. Bees were an essential part of Egyptian farming life, and beekeeping was a highly respected and organized industry. The Egyptians didn't just use honey in their food and embalming rituals, they used it as part of the agricultural cycle. Bees were cultivated in specially designed hives, and their role in pollination helped ensure the fertility of the land. The Egyptians understood that bees played a crucial role in the pollination of crops, which directly affected their harvests. Beekeeping wasn't just a hobby. It was a vital agricultural practice that helped ensure the fertility of their lands. Historians still debate how widespread beekeeping was in ancient Egypt, but there's evidence that it was highly organized. Special tools for beekeeping have been discovered, and honey was often traded as a valuable commodity. In fact, some of the best honey came from the rich, flower-filled lands near the Nile Delta, where flowers bloomed in abundance. Bees fed on these blossoms, producing honey that was highly prized for its quality. It wasn't just used in tombs and temples. It was something the common people could use too, either for their own consumption or as part of trade. Beyond its agricultural applications, honey also played a role in the daily diets of Egyptians. As mentioned before, honey was the primary sweetener in Egyptian cuisine, and it was used in everything from bread and cakes to beverages like beer. Yes, even beer. The Egyptians weren't just sipping on simple honeyed tea, they were brewing beer that had honey mixed in to enhance its flavor. This might sound strange, but in a world without modern sugar, honey was a prized addition to many different foods and drinks. It's fascinating to think that honey wasn't just reserved for the wealthy or for religious purposes. It was a common ingredient in the lives of ordinary Egyptians. For the working class, honey helped fuel long days of labor, and it was often given to workers as part of their daily rations. Honey's ability to provide quick energy and its ability to keep food fresh made it a valuable resource in both the home and the workplace. But honey's versatility didn't stop there. It was also used in cooking and medicine in ways that might seem surprisingly modern. Egyptian medical texts, some of the earliest examples of recorded medicine, detail the use of honey as a treatment for a variety of ailments. It was used to dress wounds, treat infections, and even soothe sore throats. The Egyptians understood that honey could help speed up healing, and they used it as a remedy for everything from stomach issues to burns and cuts. Some even used honey in their hair, thinking it could promote growth and strengthen follicles. It's no wonder that honey played such an essential role in Egyptian society. It was something that could literally heal both the body and the soul. And let's not forget about the spiritual and magical aspects of honey's role in Egyptian culture. The use of honey in offerings to the gods wasn't just a ritualistic practice. It was also thought to carry magical properties. Honey was believed to have the power to attract the favor of the gods and to protect the soul in the afterlife. In a world filled with magic, honey was a powerful substance, one that could connect the living with the divine. Historians still argue whether honey's use in daily life was as widespread and practical as some of the more ceremonial aspects of its use. But it's clear that honey was more than just a luxury for the elite. It was an essential part of Egyptian culture that connected the physical and spiritual realms. It wasn't just about preserving the body for the afterlife or offering something sweet to the gods. It was about the practical, everyday use of a substance that could heal, sustain, and protect. Honey was, in every sense of the word, a gift from the gods, one that the Egyptians used to maintain balance and harmony in their lives. So, as we conclude this deep dive into honey's significance in ancient Egypt, it's important to remember that this sweet substance wasn't just a passing trend. It was a key ingredient in the preservation of life, the maintenance of health, and the protection of the soul. Whether it was used in the tombs of pharaohs, the kitchens of peasants, or the temples of the gods, honey was a symbol of divine favor, vitality, and immortality. As we continue our exploration of honey in ancient Egypt, let's shift focus to another fascinating aspect of Egyptian society, its relationship with nature and the environment. The Egyptians were keenly attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, and they understood how to harness the resources around them in both practical and symbolic ways. Honey, being a natural product of bees and flowers, was not just a commodity. It was a reflection of their profound connection to the land and the divine forces they believed governed it. The ancient Egyptians were remarkably resourceful, using everything from the papyrus plant to precious metals to craft and sustain their civilization. Bees, however, held a special place in their worldview. As we've mentioned, bees were seen as sacred creatures, often associated with the sun god Ra. According to Egyptian mythology, bees were believed to have been created from Ra's tears, and they symbolized fertility, creation, and renewal. Honey, as the product of bees, was regarded not only as a useful substance, but as a divine gift, capable of preserving life in the mortal world and aiding the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. Beekeeping itself was an art, a practice, that went beyond mere agriculture. It was seen as a spiritual responsibility, with beekeepers serving as custodians of a sacred relationship between humans, nature, and the gods. Historians still debate whether beekeeping was done exclusively by certain religious groups or whether it was a common practice across Egyptian society, but there is evidence to suggest that beekeeping was highly organized. Archaeologists have found evidence of beekeeping tools in ancient Egyptian sites, including special hives and implements used for harvesting honey. The precision with which the Egyptians cultivated bees suggests that they understood the importance of honey in both practical and symbolic terms. Beekeeping wasn't just about collecting honey. It was about maintaining balance within the natural order. In a society that relied heavily on the Nile River and its annual flooding to fertilize the land, the Egyptians saw their connection to nature as a fundamental part of their spiritual life. The bees were, in many ways, another reflection of this balance. They were the pollinators, ensuring the fertility of the land, just as the Nile ensured the fertility of their crops. Without bees, the agricultural system would be incomplete. Without honey, many of the rituals, medicines, and everyday life practices we've discussed would not have been possible. Let's think about this for a moment. In the context of their agricultural society, the Egyptians understood the importance of every resource. The Nile provided water and silt to fertilize crops, while honey provided sweetness, medicine, and preservation. Both the Nile and the bees were crucial to the continuity of life. The bees were considered a manifestation of the divine balance that Egyptians sought in all things, and honey symbolized that same connection to the natural world. It was both a physical product of the earth and a symbol of divine favor. The connection between honey, bees, and fertility was not limited to the Egyptian worldview alone. Across the ancient world, honey was considered a symbol of abundance, vitality, and vitality. In Egypt, however, the symbolic value of honey was elevated to a sacred status intertwined with the lives of both the living and the dead. It was believed that by using honey to preserve the dead, Egyptians could ensure a successful transition into the afterlife, just as bees ensured the fertility and abundance of the land. Historians still argue whether this symbolic connection between honey and fertility was purely cultural or if it was linked to deeper mystical beliefs about the power of nature. Regardless of the answer, it's clear that honey was far more than a mere commodity in Egypt. It was a substance that connected the human world to the divine and to the forces of nature that governed it. In the grander scheme of Egyptian life, honey represented not just the sweetness of life, but also the depth of their connection to the natural world. It was a symbol of fertility, abundance, and the cycles of life and death. The Egyptians used honey to ensure that the body and soul were preserved for eternity, and they also used it to sustain the living. The bee, as a symbol of divine balance, embodied everything the Egyptians valued: vitality, protection, and renewal. And in a world so deeply attuned to the cycles of life, Honey was their key to unlocking the sweetness of immortality. As we continue our journey through the ancient Egyptian use of honey, let's shift gears a bit to explore the lasting legacy of honey's role in preservation and ritual. In many ways, honey has outlasted the very civilizations that first discovered its remarkable properties. But how did the practices of the ancient Egyptians regarding honey influence later cultures? And how does it resonate with us today? After all, while we may not be using honey to embalm mummies, the substance continues to hold a prominent place in both our kitchens and our healing practices. Let's start with how honey's preservation role traveled through time. The Egyptians were not the only ones to recognize honey's preserving power. Other ancient cultures, including the Greeks and Romans, adopted similar practices of using honey to preserve fruits, herbs, and even meats. The ancient Greeks, for example, would dip fruits like figs or apples in honey to extend their shelf life, much like how we use sugar to preserve jams and jellies today. The Romans took this practice further, creating honeyed wines and using honey in various medicinal applications. So, while honey's association with mummification was uniquely Egyptian, its role as a preservative was embraced by many ancient civilizations. Historians still argue how widespread the practice of using honey for preservation was outside Egypt. But one thing is clear: honey's influence extended far beyond the tombs of the pharaohs. It became a symbol of life, longevity, and health, a reputation that would stick for centuries to come. Ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen praised honey for its medicinal qualities, using it in remedies for a variety of ailments. Roman soldiers were known to carry honey with them on campaigns, using it as both a food source and a natural antibiotic to treat wounds. Honey's staying power as a useful substance wasn't just limited to the Egyptians. It became a staple of ancient medicine across multiple cultures. But the journey of honey's legacy didn't stop in antiquity. Over the centuries, honey's uses were refined and rediscovered, with modern science eventually uncovering the reasons why honey is so effective as a preservative. Today we know that honey's high sugar content, low moisture, and antibacterial properties make it an excellent choice for preserving not only food, but also for medicinal use. It's no surprise that honey continues to be used in modern wound care, thanks to its natural ability to promote healing and prevent infection. The ancient Egyptians may not have understood the full science behind it, but they were undeniably ahead of their time in recognizing honey's remarkable powers. Now, honey's legacy doesn't only lie in its ability to preserve. As we've seen throughout our exploration, honey's symbolic value was deeply entwined with the Egyptian spiritual world. The ancient Egyptians believed that honey had divine properties that could connect the living to the gods and ensure the deceased would have a sweet journey into the afterlife. Even today, honey continues to hold spiritual significance in various cultures. In some parts of the world, honey is used in rituals and offerings to deities, much like the Egyptians did thousands of years ago. Whether used in Christian liturgy, Hindu rituals, or African spiritual practices, honey's divine associations endure. Historians still debate whether the spiritual significance of honey was a purely Egyptian phenomenon, or if it was shared by other cultures. Regardless, it's clear that honey held an important place, not just in daily life, but in the broader spiritual and cultural landscape. Its use in religious offerings, its association with gods, and its role in sacred rituals have ensured its place in the spiritual traditions of many different cultures across time. As we look at honey's modern-day uses, we can also reflect on how the Egyptians were among the first to understand the dual nature of honey, both as a practical, everyday tool and as a powerful symbol of the divine. Today, honey is still used in many cultures for both medicinal and spiritual purposes. It is incorporated into teas, skincare, and healing salves, and its golden glow continues to evoke a sense of the sacred, the way the Egyptians revered honey. For both its physical properties and its spiritual significance has left an indelible mark on how we view this ancient substance today. The legacy of honey in preservation, medicine, and spirituality lives on not just in Egypt, but in countless cultures worldwide. From its use in mummification to its place in modern health practices, honey has always been more than just a sweetener. It's a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, between the living and the dead, between the present and the eternal. In many ways, the ancient Egyptians understood that better than anyone, and it's why honey continues to be so fascinating, even after all these years. Now that we've traced the journey of honey from ancient Egypt to modern times, let's take a moment to reflect on how this humble substance is still interwoven into the tapestry of our daily lives. In fact, despite all the time that has passed, since the days of the pharaohs, honey remains a key ingredient in both our food and medicine. It's remarkable to think that a substance once used to preserve mummies is still relevant today, and still holds the same reverence in various cultures around the world. But honey's lasting presence in our modern world isn't just a coincidence. It speaks to the profound wisdom of the ancient Egyptians. They understood that the natural world provided everything necessary to sustain life, and they harnessed those resources to achieve their goal of immortality. And while the process of mummification itself is no longer a widespread practice, the core beliefs behind it continue to resonate with us today. The Egyptians believed that preserving the body was not only about keeping it intact, but about ensuring the continuity of the soul. And honey, with its sweet and eternal properties, symbolized this continuity. One fascinating aspect of this is how honey's symbolic connection to immortality has survived across centuries. As we've seen, the Egyptians used honey to preserve their dead, ensuring that their bodies would remain intact for the afterlife. But honey's role didn't stop there. It also played a vital role in the Egyptian belief that the soul would be carried into eternity, undisturbed by the ravages of time. Even today, honey retains this association with preservation and longevity, whether it's in the form of a centuries-old jar of honey found in a tomb or a honey-based remedy passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether honey's use in ancient rituals was purely symbolic or if it was grounded in practical reasons, such as its preserving properties. But no matter where the truth lies, one thing is clear. Honey was more than just a product in the ancient world. It was a vehicle for eternity. And that symbolism has lasted for millennia. From the embalming process to the religious offerings, honey was a key element in the ancient Egyptians' quest for immortality, both in body and spirit. Fast forward to modern times, and honey still retains its status as a symbol of healing and longevity. It's found in natural remedies for everything, from sore throats to skincare. Honey-based medicines are used in hospitals, and even in advanced wound care, where it's prized for its natural antibacterial properties. The Egyptians may have seen honey as a divine gift, but we now know it has real, tangible benefits. Whether it's soothing a cough or acting as an antibiotic, honey continues to be a versatile tool for preserving health. Let's not forget that honey has also maintained its symbolic power. Many cultures still view honey as a sacred or auspicious substance. In some traditions, it's used in wedding ceremonies, symbolizing sweetness and prosperity for the couple's future. In others, honey is offered to gods, much as the Egyptians did, to seek blessings and protection. And in the world of wellness and beauty, honey continues to be a symbol of natural purity, used in skin treatments and cosmetics that promise to nourish and rejuvenate. But what really stands out is the remarkable continuity of honey's symbolic power. In many ways, the ancient Egyptians were the first to recognize the connection between honey and immortality. Whether through their use in the mummification process or their belief in its divine properties, honey was always seen as more than just a sweet substance. It was a bridge between life and death, between the earthly and the divine. And that same symbolism persists today, as honey continues to be seen as a substance that preserves and protects, both physically and spiritually. As we draw to a close on our exploration of honey's role in ancient Egyptian life, it's clear that this humble substance continues to carry great weight, both literally and figuratively. From its use in the tombs of kings to its place in modern health and wellness practices, honey has transcended time. It's a reminder of the Egyptians' deep understanding of nature, their connection to the divine, and their relentless pursuit of immortality. And in the end, perhaps it's fitting that honey, a substance that symbolizes life, preservation, and eternity, has continued to endure for millennia. So as you go about your day, perhaps you'll think of the ancient Egyptians and their sweet, sticky secret to immortality. The next time you drizzle honey on your toast or stir it into your tea, remember that you're connecting with something far older than you might realize, a substance that has been revered for thousands of years and whose legacy continues to endure in ways both tangible and symbolic. As we bring our journey through the ancient Egyptian use of honey to a close, let's take a final reflective pause. We've explored its many roles, from preserving the bodies of pharaohs for the afterlife to sweetening everyday life, from serving as a powerful medicinal tool to maintaining spiritual significance. We've traced its roots in ancient Egypt, watched it travel across cultures and centuries, and now we're left with a powerful image: honey, a substance that has endured for millennia, bridging the worlds of the living and the dead, of the divine and the earthly. It's as if honey itself is a metaphor for time itself, able to preserve not only the body but also the essence of a civilization and its beliefs. The Egyptians, with their profound understanding of life and death, didn't just view honey as a substance. They saw it as an integral part of their eternal journey. Whether they were using it to preserve the physical body for the afterlife or offering it as a sacred gift to the gods, honey represented something much more significant. It was the essence of immortality, a sweet, golden elixir that held the power to transcend time, to keep things alive long after they were gone. But perhaps what is most intriguing about the Egyptians' use of honey is how it parallels our own lives. We too are constantly looking for ways to preserve, protect, and ensure our legacies. While we may no longer mummify our loved ones or offer honey to gods, we still seek ways to preserve our health, our memories, and even the very fabric of our cultures. In a way, honey's journey from ancient Egypt to the modern world is a reflection of humanity's unending desire to conquer time, to leave something lasting behind. And just like honey preserved the bodies of the pharaohs, it also preserves memories. When we use honey in our kitchens today, when we apply it to our skin or use it in a natural remedy, we are connecting with something that has been cherished for thousands of years. The sweet, sticky substance that once ensured a smooth passage into the afterlife now finds its place in our daily routines, reminding us of the deep connection we share with those who came before us. There's something deeply comforting about the fact that a substance so simple, so pure, can carry with it such weight. Honey, in its most basic form, is just nectar from flowers. Yet in the hands of the Egyptians, it became a substance that could preserve life itself, protect the soul, and ensure immortality. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound things are the simplest. In a world that often seems to race forward at breakneck speed, it's comforting to think that something as natural and enduring as honey can tie us back to a time and place that, while long gone, still resonates with us today. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment to appreciate the eternal nature of honey, both as a physical substance and as a symbol. The Egyptians may have used it to preserve their pharaohs, but today, honey continues to preserve something much more intangible: the stories, traditions, and beliefs of a civilization that understood the deep connections between life, death, and eternity. From their ancient rituals to our modern-day uses, honey remains a reminder that some things never truly fade. They simply find new ways to live on. Now, as you relax and reflect on tonight's journey, think about the legacy of honey and its enduring presence in our world. Just like the Egyptians preserved their mummies, we too preserve the things that matter most to us. In the case of honey, its legacy is preserved not only in the jars we still find in ancient tombs, but in the way it continues to sweeten our lives, heal our wounds, and remind us of the eternal connections we share with those who have come before.